you today as well.
Let's kick it off with a quick intro and background on Marinade, the company.
Sure. So Hadley Stern, work at a leading staking provider for Solana called Marinade. And one of the reasons we're here today is to talk about the health of the Solana Validator ecosystem. One of the reasons we're able to do that is Marinade is actually pretty unique in that we don't run any validators ourselves, which at first may sound kind of odd for a staking provider, but it's actually, no pun intended with our name, our secret sauce. Because we don't run any validators, we take people who want to stake Solana and distribute that stake to the most highly performant validators, which ends up giving end users greater security and the highest reward that they can get through any Solana ecosystem. So that's a little bit about Marinade.
Okay, awesome. I mean, Marinade's been in the space since the early days of Solana. Who better to ask than, stepping back a bit from a more holistic point of view, the state of the validator ecosystem, where we are in the beginning, where we are now, and how it all plays a role?
Sure, yeah, so you're absolutely right. Marinade is kind of an OG protocol, and I've been at the company for almost a year now, and it's a great pleasure when you talk to people, because a lot of people, their first experience staking with Solana was with Marinade. If we look at the health of the validator ecosystem across Solana, our view is that it's generally speaking very healthy. You've got over 1,300 validators, and one of the reasons Marinade first started 3 years ago was to help with the decentralization of Solana. When Solana first started, it was, there were obviously less validators, and validators, in order to really be profitable, need stake, and Marinade helps supply that stake. So if you look at just the raw number of validators now, you've got over 1,300 geographically dispersed. You've got very large institutional validators, but you've also got individual or small company validators as well. So there's not only a diversity in number, geolocation, but there's also a diversity in terms of size. The other factor to look at when you think about validators and the health of a blockchain protocol is how many clients there are. And initially, of course, when Solana originally launched, there was one client sponsored by the foundation. Now you have multiple clients. Jito has obviously done a fabulous job as a client and become the dominant client of choice. But you also have more competition coming soon with FireDancer. So by the metric of clients, you see that the validator ecosystem is healthy. And then another way to look at it is the percent of Solana staked and how much participation there is by Solana users. That is also generally very healthy. Over 60% of Solana is staked. Interestingly, 90% of that is native, and a smaller amount is liquid. So, that's another piece to talk about in the Solana ecosystem of why that is, as opposed to Ethereum. So by all metrics, the validator ecosystem is healthy, it's functioning. Politics aside, the Trump coin was a very interesting moment, I think, in blockchain transaction history, in that you had, in that 24-hour period of the Trump coin, about 10% of transaction volume of NASDAQ happening in that 12-hour period on Solana. And the validators there, they stood up the test of time. There were some troubles or complications with some DEXs, but generally speaking, the infrastructure stood.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. On that same note, let's double click on the liquid staking versus the regular staking.
Yeah.
Like, just some background on what that is in the first place, and then how it plays out in Solana maybe versus other ecosystems.
Sure, so great question. So liquid staking really was invented for the Ethereum blockchain, and it had a very good reason. So in order to stake on ETH, you need to have a minimum of 32 ETH, which give or take price action is anywhere from 50 to 75,000. And to natively stake, you can get it in pretty quickly, but it can take up to a week or 2 weeks to unstake, depending on which solution you're using. So liquid staking token was a way to innovate and create a token that represents staked value, that instead of actually natively staking, you could then buy a liquid staking token on Ethereum. It also has some advantages in that you can do some things with DeFi. On Solana, the case is not as clear, and Marinade started with MSOL, a liquid staking token, and very proud to be basically the first and one of the biggest still liquid staking tokens. But if you look at Solana, the economics and time are different. To natively stake on Solana, you only need one sol. So give or take market action, that's, I don't know, 120 to maybe more like hopefully 150, but certainly less than 64 or 100,000. And also in Solana, the unstaked time is a Solana epoch, which is 55 hours, generally speaking. So you're only stuck with that Solana in an unstaked state for 55 hours. So for that reason, we believe that native staking not only has its place in the Solana ecosystem, but should be the dominant way that particularly institutions stake. And this is very important for institutions to hear loud and clearly. With a liquid staking token, you're taking on smart contract risk, which you do not have when you stake natively. And even more importantly for institutions, and my background is Fidelity, Bank of New York Mellon, when you stake natively in Solana, you retain custody of your Solana. So that's a bit of a longer conversation, but our clients really like that because from a fiduciary and qualified custodian standpoint, control is really important. So the sort of too long didn't read is that there's less of a reason for liquid staking on Solana. There's less of a need for it, except if you want to do something with the token in DeFi. And we believe from a regulatory and security standpoint, native staking is the way to go.
Yeah, it's interesting how it kind of diverged from Ethereum's path. It's a little bit, I guess, path dependent, how these two different ecosystems went. And one similar, I guess, discussion or debate that's coming on is something about issuance reduction.
Yeah.
And I know there was a proposal for that, but maybe before we look into that, maybe talk about the validator economics in Solana, like in terms of what the fees are, how it's changed over time, the emission schedule.
Yeah, so validators, I mean, we don't envy the task of validators, and that's, one of the, I think, fun things about Marinade is we have multiple clients and constituents, and validators are a key part of that. If you, listen to this and think, oh, I'll just go home and run a Solana validator like a Bitcoin node or Ethereum, it's a lot more complex. So you need very high compute, very expensive, a lot of RAM, a lot of hard disk space, 100% network uptime. So for that reason, it's quite, validators are kind of professional. And you've seen a diversity of where they earn their fees from. So inflation rewards, Jito tips, and other sources of revenue are now available to validators. And that's also another strength of Solana, is the way that validators can make money has diversified from really a single point to 3 or 4 different areas. And yes, you're referring to the recent proposals, which I think were, regardless of where you've sat on the proposal side, I think it's actually another very healthy indication of the Solana ecosystem. There was a proposal put forward, there was healthy debate. It got a little heated at times, but never too heated. And then there was a vote, and to many people's surprise, the vote that was really put forward by a certain set of the ecosystem was rejected by the validators, but in a very fair way. But that vote had to do with changing the inflation metrics of Solana and reducing that schedule. Yeah,
I mean, the way that debate hashed itself out, it seemed very diplomatic, unlike some of the other ecosystems, maybe in this space. Do you have any thoughts on how the vote ended up? Were you in favor of one way or the other? Was just personally speaking?
Yeah, personally, I was actually against 228. And I was public about it. It just felt funny to me to have a proposal come from an incredible, but the largest VC in the space. That just seemed a little strange to me. But in talking to our CEO, it was interesting because he brought some of the Solana perspective to the conversation, which was kind of move fast and break things. And so the Marinade official position was actually, even though we're not a validator, so we couldn't vote, was support. And I think that's what's really, again, exciting and interesting about the Solana ecosystem is, that ethos of, okay, if something doesn't work out, we can change it, we can adjust to it. But ultimately it didn't pass, but obviously the ideas behind it will continue to resonate, and there'll be other proposals put forward.
Yeah, so how do you see, you mentioned earlier in this conversation that Solana is expanding in the number of clients it has, the number
Yeah.
of validators in the network, the number of nodes and RPCs. How do you see this expansion going forward? Or like maybe another proposal does something similar to SIMD 228, something that maybe changes it slightly. How do you see like the decentralization of Solana moving forward, and what metrics would you even use for that?
Yeah, I think the important word, right, hopefully is decentralization. And I think Solana's gotten over that hump of with the amount of validators and the diversity of validators, the kind of centralization argument. And if anything, the not success of 228, I think, validates that perspective that this is not a centralized chain. This is a healthy community. I think for the ecosystem writ large, the important thing is going to be continued transaction throughput. And hopefully that's going to come from other use cases other than meme coins. And I believe it will come from real world assets that are coming on chain. My sort of rebuttal to the whole meme coin thing is ignore the fact of what they are, but why did it occur on Solana? It occurred on Solana because it was the best, fast, cheapest way to actually be able to do that. So what else can we do? What else needs to be big, fast, cheap in terms of issuance, trading, et cetera, real world assets? So I think that will continue to grow, and the validator system will continue to evolve. There's also SIMD 123, which was addressing fees and certain fees that validators could return to stakers in a more automatic way. Even though that's something that Marinade empowers now, we think that's healthy for the validator ecosystem. So I think the good news is, by metrics, you can look at this quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively, the metrics support the fact that the Solana validator ecosystem is healthy. Yes, there does need to be more, likely more clients and fire dancers coming online, and there'll be other innovations that will continue to decentralize that. And then qualitatively, the behavior of the community, the behavior of the validators continues to be very decentralized and positive.
On that client front, so Ethereum has multiple clients. They herald this as another point of decentralization.
Yeah.
At what point does it, though, start to become too much? As in, there are clients, and that's good because if maybe one client has a bug, then the other clients can run without any issues.
Yeah.
But Solana's ethos is move fast and break things.
Yeah.
And if there starts to become too many clients, does that make it more difficult for the chain to progress now that all these different client teams have to update and upgrade in line with the Solana network?
Yeah.
Does it slow down things? And at what number is too many clients or too little?
So for Solana, I don't think we're anywhere near close to that. We've got the main client by the foundation. We've got Jito, which makes up about 90% of usage for clients. And then we've got Firedancer coming online. So while there's a diversity, there's still, quite a lot of centralization in terms of client use. So I don't think we're there yet. I think the answer to that question is pretty simple, that the blockchain network scales or it doesn't. You've seen this with Bitcoin mining clients as well, and ETH mining, et cetera. So I think the economics either support additional clients or they don't, and those clients obviously have to plug into the blockchain network. There's absolutely economic incentive for people to get clients right. One thing that a lot of validators do is they're actually tweaking the clients themselves. So they're taking the client package and doing things for optimization as well. So there's going to continue to be innovation in the client set.
And what about, Fire Dancers? As you said, we're looking forward to the release of that this year. That's supposed to be tip of the top. If that starts to make more and more adoption, what's the incentive for using these other clients if running Fire Dancer does give you the best outcome?
That's the market. So that's, the incentive is not there. And so that's what makes the space so, I think, fun and interesting to build on, versus a centralized kind of tech stack. You're building on top of the blockchain, and you're building on top of an open public network and protocol, and it's kind of made the best protocol win. And that's really been our ethos. So another piece with Marinade is our stake auction marketplace. So the piece of detail I didn't get into is that we don't run any validators. When our clients stake with us, we take that Solana and we distribute it to multiple validators. But on the other end, we've created the stake auction marketplace mechanism where validators bid with certain economic elements to get that stake. and we pass that on to users. Well, that flow that I just talked about there is a protocol product built on top of an open public blockchain network, built in the open, where validators through a CLI interface, there's no contract in terms of a paper contract or anything like that, can either use it or not use it. So that's, I think, the difference between innovating in the blockchain space and innovating in a centralized tech space. And this, again, will continue to evolve. So Marinade's ethos since day one has been decentralization, highest rewards with lowest risk for users. That started with MSOL. That continues with Marinade Native. Okay. And I still want to double click on this again.
Yeah. Marinade has no preference for which client takes adoption. It doesn't matter, but it does matter. But you do have a preference towards native versus liquid staking.
Yeah, we do. We provide both. So we have a point of view that is up for debate and discussion. MSOL continues to be one of the largest liquid staking tokens. So it's not like we're saying liquid staking is necessarily a bad thing. Our point of view is that for institutions, native staking makes a lot more sense. Again, no smart contract risk with liquid staking token. Custody agnostic, and you retain control of your assets, and no need to. Most institutions aren't looking to futz around with a liquid staking token and 10x leverage. So it's not one or the other to us. We offer both, but really, if you're an institution on Solana, there's not really a need for an LST.
Okay, and for the auction mechanism, can you just go into how that gives the best price for stakers on the Marinade network?
Sure, absolutely. So our validators come in and they bid every Solana epoch, which is about 55 hours, for the ability or the right to receive some stake. And they do that with different economic elements, including GITO tips and fees, and additional fees that are not currently transferable from validators to end stakers in other protocols. So when they do this auction, validators have different motives for bidding at Marinade. They may want to scale up their operation, and in scaling up their operation, they're willing to receive slightly less rewards in order to scale, or they may be bootstrapping. So that auction element is basically a way to create a market for something where there's economic value trapped in the validators, and there's stake trapped in people who want to stake Solana, and so we're kind of this matchmaker in the middle with the stake auction marketplace.
And it works similarly both for liquid and native?
It works exactly the same. There are two different auctions, so if you go to our site, there's two different APYs, but they work very similar.
And would it be that which one tends to have a higher APY?
Neither or. Yeah, I like the way you're thinking, but it's very, very close. The most important thing is that our rewards trend to about 20 to 100 basis points higher than staking anywhere else. So this is, again, another very kind of clear conversation with institutions that if you want to get the highest rewards over time, you should stake with Marinade Native.
And maybe this is not something you can say, maybe this is not something we've discussed, but if the institutions go the native staking route, with their own risk assessment, could they have their own liquid staking token?
That's an interesting idea. I mean, you've seen Sanctum kind of power that. Again, it really goes back to utility. The only use of a liquid staking token is if you want to do something else with that token in DeFi, in Solana. There's not really any other utility. So if institutions want to do that, and we do speak to some institutions on the hedge fund trading side who are very into MSOL and use it in quite sophisticated ways. So I do see the two potentially coexisting, where there's going to be native staking more for the ETF market, which we're already engaged with, and the fund market, but MSOL for the derivatives and collateral and more TradFi meets DeFi world come together may have some utility as well. But I don't see institutions, having been at institutions, I don't see them spinning up an LST themselves. It's kind of complicated.
We're coming up on time, but last quick question.
Okay.
You mentioned ETFs. For an ETF issuer, ETF provider, or even for a custodian, of the same two, liquid versus native, which one do you think is better?
Again, native for practical reasons and for regulatory reasons. Practically, you're taking far less risk. By no smart contract risk, you're retaining custody. So it has to be native. And then from a regulatory standpoint, even in our friendly, changed administration, we'll see what happens with liquid staking tokens in terms of whether they are not a security. But ignoring that issue, the primary reason is security and return.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Hadley.
Okay, thank you very much.
Expertise.